For as long as I can remember, I've tried to explain to my friends, my girlfriend, and my family why I love playing video games. But talking about what makes games great is like trying to describe a sunset to a blind person. Words only go so far, and because of that, I decided to create this series to shine a spotlight on games that define excellence. Games with great stories, art, graphics, music, and gameplay. My hope is that at the end of each video, people will understand a little bit more about why we game. Looking back at all the games I've played over the years, I can point out only a few that really changed the course of my life. Halo Combat Evolved was definitely one of those games. The universe that was built sucked me in. The lore and the characters extended beyond what I played on screen and carried over into books and eventually into anime and live action series. I also built friendships because of it. Sitting around the lunch table talking about launching warthogs and setting up LAN parties for the weekends became all too common at school. Where other games would fade away after a month or so of playing them, my obsession with Halo lasted years thanks to the community that formed around the game. Whether or not you like Halo is irrelevant. The fact is, it was one of the games that defined the first-person shooter genre, and now I'm going to explain why it was so important, not just to gaming, but to me personally. Back in 2001, games were just starting to find their footing in the 3D space. Sure, Super Mario 64 was the standard for 3D platforming, but there was no such thing for the FPS genre, at least in the console market. The problem wasn't the lack of good games, it was the lack of a good control system to play them. PC players had the keyboard and mouse, but going back and trying to play GoldenEye or Perfect Dark on N64 with that insane controller seems nearly impossible now. Dual analog sticks had been around for some time on the PlayStation DualShock controllers, but they were more like a gimmick than a necessity. Unless you were trying to play Ape Escape or wanted a better control scheme for Resident Evil, you weren't really using them. That was until the Master Chief stepped out of the cryo chamber. All of a sudden, those two analog sticks had a definitive purpose. It seems so simple now. Left stick controls your feet and the right stick controls your head, but back then it was a revelation. By the time most players finished the Pillar of Autumn, they were dodging plasma shots and headshotting grunts like second nature. It continues to be the gold standard for FPS control schemes even today. That wasn't the only thing Halo has given to the masses, not by a long shot. Taking your first steps onto Halo, you are introduced to what we now call Sandbox gameplay. Simply put, Sandbox gameplay is when a developer gives the player a set of tools to use and an objective, but instead of funneling them from point A to point B, they allow the player to decide how to get there. By giving the player more options and freedom, the world suddenly becomes more real. You aren't just walking down a hallway killing aliens anymore. Suddenly, you are deciding how you want to approach the enemy, especially considering their formidable AI, which holds up even by today's standards. Do you want to sneak up on them and assassinate them one by one? Or maybe grab a sniper rifle and find a high ridge to provide overwatch for some marines? Maybe you want to hop in a warthog and turn some grunts into speed bumps. By doing this, Bungie allowed the players to create their own fun and make their own stories, rather than trying to script those moments themselves. Speaking of the Warthog, one of the coolest things to come out of Halo was the introduction of vehicles and real-time physics. It was not the first game to have either of these things, but it was the first, as far as I know, to have them work as well as they did. Half-Life had come out 3 years prior on PC and had introduced objects with physics thanks to the Source engine, and plenty of other games had vehicles, but none of them worked as near flawlessly as Halo. The physics were something I didn't even notice until the craze to have game engines built around them became a thing years later, but in retrospect, they are super impressive. All the weapons and vehicles have their own weighted physics and respond somewhat realistically when dropped or affected by explosions. That can also lead to some crazy situations as well, like a Wraith Blast launching a flipped ghost causing it to crush your character, or grenades being deflected by other explosions, causing a chain reaction of shrapnel-induced mayhem. What do a warthog, a ghost, a scorpion, and a banshee have in common? They are all fun as hell to drive. At first it may feel a little like ice skating when you get behind the wheel, but give yourself a few minutes in any one of these vehicles and you'll feel like a badass. Driving around in a warthog with a marine on the back mowing down elites with a chain gun is some of the most fun you'll have in a game ever. At first I didn't think it would get much better than that, but then I stepped out onto the ice and began to drool at the sight of the scorpion tank. It was like Christmas morning steamrolling all over the Covenant and turning ghosts into pieces of charred plastic. But the coup de grace was jumping inside the Banshee. It was a feeling that no other game had ever provided me with before. Not only could I take enemies out on foot and in ground-based vehicles, but now I was flying around bombing tanks and getting into aerial dogfights. For the first time ever, I felt like a game had given me the taste of true freedom, and it's something I will never forget. I would argue that the biggest contribution Halo made to the medium was that it showed how a great story could be told without sacrificing gameplay. While you play mainly in a first-person perspective, the cinematics play out more like a CG movie. Shown in third person and through the perspective of Master Chief, it's how a majority of the information is given to the player. Every scene is like a mini movie, and I found myself looking forward to each one so I can get another piece of the puzzle. By the end of the opening cinematic, you have far more questions than answers. How did the Master Chief end up here? Who built this giant ring world out in the middle of nowhere? Who are the Covenant and why do they want to exterminate the human race? Some of these questions are answered, some are not. Just like the best movies, books, and TV shows, if you want to know more, you have to read between the lines. That doesn't mean that when you finish you won't be satisfied. It gives you exactly what you need, no more, no less. Unlike Halo 2, but let's not talk about Halo 2's ending, or lack thereof.
Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
It's hard to think of a time where online multiplayer gaming wasn't around, but back in 2001, unless you had a Dreamcast or a PC, a majority of your gaming was done solo or with your buddy sitting right next to you on the couch. Although Xbox Live wasn't around, Halo still had a die-hard multiplayer community. At first I would just play the campaign in co-op with my buddy Steve, and after endless hours of playing the game on legendary difficulty and trying to launch a warthog into space, I decided to start setting up LAN parties. The Xbox was unique in the fact that it had a built-in Ethernet port, a first for a console, and Halo utilized that by allowing you to get up to 16 players on a LAN and play multiplayer. For a time it became a quest for me to get a full 16-player match going, but it never happened. I did, however, get a few 12-player matches going, and it was some of the most fun I've ever had playing multiplayer. There's something truly special about getting that many friends together in the same house playing CTF on Blood Gulch, screaming insults at each other, laughing, and just having a good time. It's weird to think that those days are pretty much dead due to the internet and online gaming, but I was glad to be able to have those experiences before they vanished forever. All these things on their own are impressive, but when you combine them all in one seamless and polished package, it becomes something spectacular. As I was playing it to capture footage for this video, it still felt great, like going back and playing a game like Super Mario World or Sonic the Hedgehog 2. For better or worse, Halo is now built into the DNA of modern gaming, but more importantly, it is a huge part of me and why I game. So those are some of the reasons why I think Halo is one of the greatest games of all time. But what do you think? Do you agree with me, or do you think there is another game out there that deserves more praise? Let me know in the comments section down below, and make sure you smack that like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to hear me talk more about why we game.